Mud sucked at Clara Dawson's boots, as if the earth itself wanted to pull her under. The wagon platform creaked beneath her, every groan an accusation. Rain hadn't fallen in days, but the town square still stank of trampled dirt, sweat, and horses. Men gathered like vultures, hats low, eyes sharp with judgment. She stood with hands bound loosely in front, a torn shawl pulled tight across her shoulders. It did nothing against the wind that sliced like thin knives. The auctioneer called it a labor contract, but everyone here knew what was being sold. "Pretty face, even with that past," someone snorted. A whisper slithered through the crowd. "Can't bear children. Waste of coin." Heat flared across her scarlet cheeks, worse than any winter chill. Clara lowered her gaze, focusing on the single thing she still clutched, a piece of wood, smooth from years of rocking. The last remnant of the nursery chair she once sat in, dreaming of lullabies that never came. "Do I hear $5? The auctioneer barked. A drunk with a crooked grin lifted his hand. "Reckon I can put her to use." Laughter cut into her like broken glass. Clara's pulse thundered. She swayed slightly, though she refused to cry. "A Dawson doesn't break in front of wolves," her late husband once said, but he'd left her to their teeth all the same. The drunk stumbled forward, breath sour with whiskey. "Come on, sweetheart," he slurred, reaching for her arm. Then another voice, low, firm, cutting clean through the filth of jeers. "I'll take her." The crowd shifted. Luke McAllister stepped forward with the calm presence of a man who'd seen too much war to fear a town full of gossipers. His coat was worn, dust-caked. A silver star once pinned to his chest now left a faded imprint. He didn't look at Clara right away. Didn't leer or judge. He just counted bills, handed them to the auctioneer without a word, then tipped his hat to her like she was still someone worth addressing with respect. The drunk grumbled, but one look from Luke silenced him quicker than a bullet. "Come on," Luke said simply. No promises, no softness, just a directive, steady, certain. Clara stepped down, nearly slipping on the slick wooden plank. He didn't touch her, only waited until she steadied herself before turning toward a chestnut mare tethered nearby. They rode out of town in silence. Fog clung low to the ground like a lingering curse. The world blurred into shades of gray, trees like skeletal hands, fences fading into ghost lines. Clara sat stiff in the saddle behind Luke, clutching the eye, broken chair leg like it might anchor her to something human. Her throat tasted of iron and shame. Luke didn't speak, didn't probe, didn't offer comfort. Yet somehow his silence wasn't cruel. It felt spacious, like a room with a door still open. Clara's mind spun. She'd heard rumors about him. The cowboy who didn't drink, who buried fallen soldiers with his own hands when no one else bothered. The man who took in cholera orphans last winter when their parents drowned in their own blood. Some called him saintly. Others said he was running from ghosts he'd never speak of. Wind whipped her hair loose. The horizon stretched wide and uncertain. She feared she'd traded one prison for another. Only this one had no walls. Just endless open land where a broken woman could vanish without notice. Luke spoke at last, voice low. "You'll have a room. Works fair. Eat when the kids eat. Rest when you need to. That's the deal." "Kids!" The word struck oddly warm, like a coal pressed into cold skin. Clara said nothing. She watched his shoulders rise and fall beneath his coat, steady as breathing earth. The rhythmic clink of his spurs kept time with her heartbeat. She gripped the chair leg tighter, rubbing her thumb over the splintered edge. Home was gone. But something, undefined, fragile, flickered faintly in the fog. Not hope. Not yet. Maybe. The faint permission to not collapse. And for now, that had to be enough. The sky had turned the color of old ash by the time they left the town behind. Clara rode behind Luke, the hooves of her mare thudding against hard ground like a heartbeat she couldn't calm. Wind tugged at her shawl, threading cold fingers beneath the fabric. The silence between them felt thick as fog. Unspoken questions, unspoken fears. She didn't know this man, only the whispers. Some said Luke McAllister once rode with a cavalry unit that vanished in a blizzard, and he walked out alone. Others claimed he buried every orphan of the cholera winter with his bare hands before taking in the ones still breathing. Men feared him because he never raised his voice, but when he did speak, it carried more weight than any sheriff's badge. She gripped the reins too tight, knuckles white. Her mind spun with what-ifs. What did he want from her? What kind of work would she do? Would he expect silence, submission, things unsaid but understood? Her mare stumbled suddenly, hoof catching in a rut. Clara pitched forward with a gasp. Luke was off his horse before she could blink. He reached for the reins, steadying the frightened animal, his hand brushing hers just long enough for her to feel the faint tremor running through him. A soldier's. Reflex, sharp as a blade. But the quake afterward felt like a memory he couldn't shake. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, unable to find her voice. His touch disappeared as quickly as it came. He adjusted the bridle, patted the horse's neck once, then mounted again with quiet efficiency. They rode on. The land stretched endless. Tufts of frost-bitten grass, scattered pine, fences half sunk in frozen mud. She watched Luke's back, the way his shoulders carried a calm she couldn't trust yet. He looked like someone used to watching storms roll in without flinching. After what felt like hours, they crested a ridge. Luke pulled his horse to a halt. Clara followed suit, breath fogging the air as she looked down. Below them, the valley lay like a folded blanket of snow-dusted fields. Smoke curled from a cabin chimney, drifting upward in lazy spirals. A broken fence leaned tiredly against the wind. 5 children chased a scruffy dog through the snow, their laughter faint but real, sharp little bursts of life against the quiet world. Luke's voice was soft but steady. "That's home. Home." The word felt foreign, like tasting sweetness after long bitterness. She almost laughed, not from joy, but disbelief. That place below seemed like something belonging to another lifetime, a memory she couldn't quite claim. She said nothing. Luke didn't push. He sat in silence beside her, as if giving her space, to study the scene, to decide if what lay ahead was threat or refuge. They continued downward, wheels of a small wagon trailing behind Luke's horse. Clara glanced back at the few possessions loaded into it, mostly blankets, a few sacks of flour, and her rocking chair leg she refused to let go of. As they neared the yard, a gust of wind barreled through the valley. The half-broken rocking chair, tied to the side of the wagon from when Luke had salvaged what he could of her things, rattled violently. The rope slipped loose. The chair leg snapped against the wood as it toppled, threatening to break apart completely. Before Clara could cry out, Luke was there. One arm shot out, catching the chair before it shattered against the frozen ground. He held it with a reverence that startled her, brushing frost from its splintered edge. "You keep this close," he murmured, handing it back into her arms like something sacred. "Some things are worth fixing." Her throat tightened. She ran a thumb over the worn groove her hand had known for years. She didn't thank him. Not because she felt ungrateful, but because the word felt too thin to carry what stirred under her ribs. The children paused their play, staring curiously. Clara stiffened, clutching the chair leg against her chest like a shield. Luke dismounted and gave a short whistle. "Inside," he called to the kids. "We got company." Company, not property, not labor. Company. As she slid from the saddle, boots sinking into snow, Clara wondered if this place was salvation, or another test she wasn't sure she had strength for. But for the first time since the auction, the air didn't taste like humiliation. It tasted like something beginning. The cabin smelled of pine and smoke, an undercurrent of damp wood lingering like a memory. Clara stepped inside, boots heavy with mud, eyes scanning the room. The hearth crackled faintly, throwing shadows that danced along the rough-hewn walls. 5 children froze mid-bite, small hands clutching spoons as if she were a specter risen from the fog. The youngest, a boy no older than 5, ducked behind a wooden post. His fingers traced carved initials, EM, faded from decades of touch. Clara's stomach knotted. The marks were old, carved by a mother who no longer lived, and in one glance, she understood she was walking into a home haunted by a ghost. A home that had once been whole, now stitched together with absence and grief. Luke moved like a shadow in the kitchen, splitting wood with practiced strikes. Each blow thudded through the cabin, echoing off the walls like a metronome to the storm outside. Rain and sleet lashed the windows, hammering against the glass in jagged rhythm. Clara pulled the torn curtains from their hooks, hands trembling slightly as she threaded needle and twine, mending the ragged edges. "Don't bother," the oldest boy muttered from the corner, eyes dark and calculating. "She's just here 'cause she's broken too." Clara's fingers faltered for a heartbeat. She swallowed, forcing herself to continue, pretending not to hear. She could feel Luke's gaze as he worked, quiet, steady, though the hint of tension in his jaw said he had heard everything. He never judged her aloud, but his eyes carried a warning. Don't mistake their cruelty for truth. Outside, the wind howled like the cry of lost souls. Rain streaked the windows in jagged sheets while sleet rattled the roof like shotgun pellets. Inside, the cabin felt smaller, warmer, but heavy with expectation. Clara worked silently, the thread pulling together fabric as she tried to pull herself together as well. One of the younger girls peeked from behind the table, eyes wide and suspicious. Clara offered the faintest of smiles, careful not to reach too quickly. One hand stayed on her work, the other brushing back a stray lock of hair. The room seemed to breathe with them all, the children wary, herself trembling in unfamiliar responsibility, Luke steady but distant, a constant reminder of the frontier's quiet gravity. The storm intensified. Lightning arced across the valley, illuminating the room in harsh white flashes. Clara paused, needle midair, heart thudding. She glanced toward the window, then caught a movement outside. Luke knelt by a small mound of earth behind the barn, hands folded in silent prayer. The flash of lightning revealed the curve of his back, hunched with grief, a hat resting beside him on the frozen ground. Clara's chest tightened. The mound was tiny, tended, marked with care. Someone lost, someone cherished. Her fingers stilled over the curtain. She could feel the ache deep in her chest, a pain both alien and familiar. Loss, weighty and raw, knotted itself into her bones. She wanted to speak, to comfort, but she remained rooted behind the curtain, watching. The wind rattled the cabin's frame, but inside, time itself seemed to pause. The children stirred, whispering among themselves, too afraid to approach, too curious to retreat entirely. Their small lives, tangled with grief and resilience, mirrored the fractured pieces she carried within herself. She understood suddenly that they had been protecting something sacred, just as she had guarded her broken heart. Luke's prayer ended with a single, whispered name. He rose, shoulders squared against the storm, and returned inside without a word. The firelight caught his profile as he passed, revealing a jaw set with determination and the faint tremor in his hands, the same tremor that had steadied her horse hours before. Clara closed the door behind him, sealing out the storm. Her heart still ached, a raw echo of shared loss and quiet understanding. She set the patched curtains carefully in place, stepping back to watch the firelight dance over the worn wooden floor. For a long moment, she let herself imagine, just imagine, that she could belong here. That perhaps the brokenness wasn't final, that fragments could be stitched together like the curtain she had sewn. The storm outside roared, but inside, a fragile warmth began to take hold. Some things, she realized, weren't meant to be fixed all at once. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a small permission to begin. The days came and went, with the rhythm of chores and the harsh beat of frontier survival. Dawn spilled gold across frost-bitten fields while Clara filled the water troughs, the ice cracking beneath her careful touch. Hooves clattered in the barn, animals snorting and stamping as she moved among them. She learned the pattern of each creature, their habits, their subtle signals of hunger or fear. Slowly, The ranch became a place that asked for effort, but returned trust. Clara patched torn trousers and mended ripped shirts by the fire, needle and thread tracing lines across worn fabric. The youngest child leaned over her shoulder, lips pressed together in concentration, trying to sound out words she pointed to in a tattered primer. Clara's voice, calm and patient, became a part of the rhythm of the house, soft, persistent, guiding. The children's laughter, small at first, began threading through the work, a melody that was almost new to her ears. One afternoon, a harsh wind carried the bark of the dog across the valley. Clara's stomach tightened as she spotted the animal, stranded and shivering, on a thin crust of ice floating above the creek. Without thinking, she kicked off her boots, sleeves rolled, and stepped onto the brittle surface. Ice cracked beneath her weight, sending shards into the frigid current. She cut her hands on the jagged edges, but she reached the dog, gripping it close to her chest. Its frantic shivers pressed warmth into her palms, and she smiled through the sting of blood and cold. When she returned, soaked and red-fingered, the children gathered around, wide-eyed. Their fear and skepticism melted in the face of her quiet determination. The dog licked her cheek, and the youngest tugged at her sleeve, whispering a tentative, "Thank you." Clara's throat tightened. Trust, she realized, was built in moments of small courage. Luke had watched from the porch, the brim of his hat low over his eyes. His hands rested on the railing, fingers curling and uncurling, silent witness to her bravery. There was something in his gaze that shifted that evening, a subtle looseness in the set of his jaw, a warmth that had never been there before. When night fell, the firelight painted the cabin walls in flickering gold and amber. Clara set a basin of warm water on the floor, and Luke crouched beside her, pulling a clean cloth over the cuts on her palms. His touch was careful, deliberate, but not hesitant. "Haven't had someone in this house who wasn't afraid to bleed," he murmured. The words lingered between them, weighty but gentle. She met his eyes, searching for mockery or judgment. There was none, only a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition of what it meant to risk oneself for others, to let the blood and cold and pain be endured without retreat. They sat together in that small silence, hands busy, but hearts noticing each other for the first time in something more than necessity. The warmth grew slowly like coals hidden under ash, not rushed or demanded, just present. Clara realized she didn't flinch at his nearness, didn't shrink from the steadiness of his presence. It felt safe. The rocking chair, now fully restored, gleamed by the window. Its wood caught the firelight, polished and smooth, a testament to care and persistence. She ran her fingers over the curves and edges, remembering the splintered piece she had clutched on the ride here. Now it sat whole, strong, waiting for her to sit and rest, to watch the snow fall, and perhaps to think of something beyond loss. Luke settled into the chair beside her one evening. Boots kicked to the floor, firelight warming his face. He didn't speak at first. Clara felt the quiet intimacy of shared space, the gentle rhythm of breathing and heat. Their eyes met over the glow of the fire, and the faintest flicker of a smile passed between them. No declarations. No grand gestures. Just the careful, unspoken acknowledgement that survival had softened the edges of grief and created something tender in its place. The children had drifted off, lulled by exhaustion and warmth. The dog curled at her feet, its body vibrating with contentment. And in that cabin, full of patched curtains, firelight and repaired wood, Clara felt the first real stirrings of belonging. She let herself breathe. The rocking chair creaked softly as Luke shifted beside her. She pressed a hand to its polished arm, tracing the grain. It wasn't just wood. It was proof that care could heal, even in a world of loss and frost. The morning air was crisp, almost brittle when the first riders appeared on the ridge. Clara spotted them before Luke did. Dark silhouettes against the pale frost of the valley, horses snorting and stamping, boots scraping against frozen earth. She felt a cold twist in her stomach, fingers tightening around the wool of her shawl. Luke didn't flinch. He moved with deliberate calm, hand resting lightly on the rifle at his side, eyes scanning the approaching men. Clara's pulse hammered against her ribs. She had seen danger before, in towns that spat shame and debt like venom, but this was different. These men carried the weight of intent, of something owed, something better. They rode closer, the horses' hooves clanging against rocks and ice. One dismounted with a sneer, spurs clinking like distant gunfire. "Thought you'd buried him?" the man called, voice low and cruel. "He's alive, and he's coming for what's his." Clara's knees weakened. The words cut through the cabin walls of safety she had built, slicing doubt and fear into her chest. Her fingers dug into her skirts as if she could anchor herself to something solid. Luke's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Every line of his body coiled like steel. The riders lingered long enough to make Clara's heart stutter, then mounted again, disappearing over the ridge with a cloud of dust and snow. Silence followed, heavy as the snow-laden pines. Clara sank to the floor beside the fire, elbows on her knees, head bowed. She waited for the fire to warm her fingers, but her body trembled with more than cold. The children were at chores, the dog asleep in a curl by the hearth. She felt the weight of confession pressing against her chest, the secret she had carried alone for years. Her voice barely rose above the crackle of the flames. "Luke!" He didn't turn, only leaned on the mantel, eyes reflecting the firelight. She swallowed hard, the words thick with shame and fear. I was married," she whispered, tears slipping free despite her efforts. "To a traitor." "Cruel, greedy." "He sold me, my debts, everything I owned. There was an accident." Her throat closed. She could not speak the words that meant everything. She was barren, and when he supposedly died, I ran. I escaped. Silence stretched between them, filled with the hiss of the fire and the faint wind rattling the window pane. Clara dared not look up. She expected judgment, perhaps disgust, maybe even rejection. Instead, Luke spoke softly, almost a whisper. But the words struck her with the weight of promise. "Then you've done your fighting." "Let me do the rest," she blinked, stunned. Relief mingled with disbelief. His hand didn't reach for hers, did not brush her cheek. There was no gesture to lessen her shame. Yet in that stillness, she felt the beginning of safety, a shelter built not from walls but from understanding. That night, the cabin was quiet but for the crackle of fire. Clara sat near the hearth, hands folded in her lap, the rocking chair between them gleaming in the amber light. Its curves reflected the flickering flames, polished and whole, a silent witness to survival and care. Luke moved to the chair, settling opposite her, boots resting on the warm floor. He didn't speak, and she didn't either. The rocking chair creaked once as he shifted, the motion steady, measured. She let her gaze drift along the grain of the wood, listening to the fire, the silence, and the unspoken bond forming in its shadow. The dog curled at her feet, sighing into sleep. Outside, the wind rattled the cabin, a muted storm against the walls. Inside, the two of them shared a space without words, and the quiet became an affirmation, a shelter stronger than any barricade or locked door. For the first time in weeks, Clara let herself exhale fully. She had fought her battles, faced her ghosts, and now, for the first time, she was not alone in holding the burden of loss. The rocking chair shifted slightly as she leaned back, steady and whole beneath her. It was not just wood. It was proof that care, trust and courage could hold weight, could bear stories of shame and survival alike. She allowed herself a small, trembling smile. Luke's eyes met hers across the fire, unspoken agreement in their depths. No words were necessary. The trust was built. The confession had been given. And for now, that was enough. Snow drifted across the valley, soft and deceptive, when the first horse bells shattered the morning calm. Clara was tending the fire when she heard the harsh clatter of boots on frozen ground. Her chest tightened. Jonas Red appeared on the ridge with 2 deputies behind him, dark eyes gleaming with certainty. "She's mine by law," he spat, the words jagged as broken glass. His boots sank into the snow with every step, leaving tracks that marked more than their passage. They marked a claim, a threat, a shadow stretching across her life. Clara froze. The children gathered at the doorway, small hands clutching one another, wide eyes reflecting fear she shared but could not speak. Luke stepped from the porch, shoulders squared, jaw taut, eyes blazing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't back down, but every muscle in his body told her he would not let this intruder take another piece of their fragile safety. Red sneered, eyes flicking over the cabin, the children, Clara herself. "I've waited long enough. Step aside, cowboy. She belongs to me." Before Clara could react, Red shoved her hard. She fell backward, snow biting at her skirts, breath stolen in a sharp gasp. Pain lanced through her wrist and side, but the humiliation stung far deeper. Something in Luke snapped. 1 second he was standing calm, measured. The next he lunged. Hands gripped Red's collar and chest, tackling him into the icy snow. The children gasped, pressing closer to the doorway, their small bodies trembling, but the deputies were quick. Hands gripped Luke, pulling and yanking with brute force. Snow flew, boots skidded, curses and shouted orders piercing the frigid air. Luke struggled, muscles straining, but the numbers overcame him. "Get him!" one deputy barked. Luke's eyes never left Clara's as they dragged him away, the cold searing his hands and face. She wanted to scream, to throw herself into the fray, but there was nothing she could do. His calm, his quiet strength had been ripped from the moment. Red's attention turned to the cabin. His boot caught the rocking chair, polished and whole just the night before, and with a cruel twist, he sent it crashing to the snow. The wood splintered violently, shards flying in the cold wind. Clara's chest tightened, a mix of grief and rage curling in her throat. "No," she screamed, voice raw and shaking. "You've broken enough, Jonas!" The children flinched. One small hand pressed against her arm. Snow swirled around the broken chair, catching the morning sun like blood on ice. The symbol of safety, of trust, of healing. Shattered, Clara sank to her knees, brushing splinters from the snow, heart pounding. The storm seemed to return with the chaos, wind whipping across the valley, rattling windows, and shaking the cabin as if the world itself was collapsing. The children clung to her skirts, trembling, eyes wide with fear and confusion. She hugged them close, voice trembling but firm. "It's going to be all right," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. She looked down at the broken chair, at the scattered wood and splinters, and felt the fragile rhythm of the ranch unraveling around her. Luke gone, Jonas triumphant, at least for now. The warmth of home replaced by cold uncertainty. Snow swirled in gusts around the cabin, and Clara felt the isolation of the valley closing in. The world outside their door seemed vast and merciless, the storm relentless. And yet beneath the fear and grief a spark lingered, a small, stubborn ember that whispered, "Fight." The children pressed closer, the dog whining softly, and Clara drew a shuddering breath. The ranch, their home, might be shaken, broken, but it was not yet lost, and she would not let it be. The ranch smelled of smoke and fear. Jonas Red had settled into Luke's cabin like a wolf claiming a den, boots scuffing the floorboards, eyes roaming over the hearth, the children, and Clara herself. She moved through the space with a careful rhythm, fetching water, feeding animals, mending what she could while keeping her gaze low. Her hands trembled as she worked, but her mind raced, calculating, always planning. The children watched her with wide, wary eyes. They resisted quietly, leaving small traces of rebellion, a drawer left ajar, tools sharpened and hidden, scraps of food secreted away. Each act was silent but defiant, a flicker of courage that reminded Clara she was not alone. She learned their secret language of glances and subtle nods, and her pulse steadied with purpose. By night, she crept through the snow-laden barn, sharpening knives, stacking wood, tucking provisions into hidden spaces. Moonlight painted silver streaks across the valley, and she felt the cold bite against her cheeks as if to warn her of the dangers outside. But she moved with precision, heart hammering with determination. Escape was possible. She had to make it possible. Meanwhile, in town, Luke sat in the narrow, dim jail cell. Rain hammered the roof, dripping through cracked timbers onto the wooden floor. He pressed his fingers against the bars, the chill seeping into his bones, and listened. A sympathetic sheriff approached, quiet in his steps, shadowed by the flickering lantern light. "You're not guilty," the sheriff said, voice low. Red's warrant's forged. Your woman's husband. He died 2 winters past. Whoever's using her papers is a fraud. He wants the land, nothing more. Luke's jaw clenched. The relief was sharp and bitter, edged with fury. Jonas had not just taken the ranch. He had stolen identity, threatened safety, and enslaved the vulnerable. Luke's hands curled around the bars, knuckles white, as thunder rolled over the town, echoing in the alleys like war drums. By nightfall, the storm broke with full force. Hail rattled the jail roof. Lightning lit the sky in stark white flashes. Luke's mind was sharp, movements precise. He picked the lock of his cell with tools hidden in his boot, the sound of metal on metal muted beneath the storm. The wind whipped at him as he stepped into the dark streets, soaked and exhilarated. Determination a pulse stronger than the storm around him. Mounting his horse, Luke rode hard, hooves thudding against the saturated ground. Hail pummeled him, soaking his coat and stinging his face. The valley ahead was a blur of white, wind, and shadow. Each step of the horse brought him closer to Clara, closer to the ranch that had been taken, closer to the family he had sworn to protect. Clara moved through the cabin in silence, checking traps and secret stashes, whispering instructions to the children. "Stay quiet," she murmured. "Hide the food. Don't let him see your hands." Her voice trembled, but it was firm, resolute. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind made her pulse spike, reminding her that the danger was real, that their lives hung in the balance. Outside, the storm raged on. Hail struck the roof with sharp, icy taps. Wind drove snow into every crevice, and the valley itself seemed bent under the weight of thunder. Clara pressed a hand to the rocking chair, still half repaired after Jonas's last attack, and drew a shaky breath. It was a symbol of resilience, a heartbeat of hope that she clung to as she prepared for the night to come. Luke rode through the dark valley, every muscle taut, eyes scanning for movement. Lightning flashed, revealing trees bent under the wind, fences half buried in snow, and the glimmer of the cabin lights ahead. He urged his horse faster, knowing that time was slipping through fingers of ice and wind, that every second brought Jonas closer to solidifying control. By the time he reached the ridge overlooking the ranch, Clara's whispered instructions were guiding the children into hiding. Shadows flitted across the snow, movement barely perceptible. Luke saw them, heart clenching, and urged his horse down the slope. A storm-driven ghost riding for justice, for safety, for home. The night was deafening with hail and wind, the valley a chaos of white and sound. Yet through the storm, Luke's determination burned brighter than any lightning strike. He would not fail them, not tonight, not ever. The cabin shuddered under the storm, the wind rattling the walls and shaking loose the last dry pine needles from the rafters. Rain pounded the roof in jagged sheets, mingling with hail that clattered like distant musket fire. Clara's breath came fast as she moved through the shadows, the children huddled behind the table, trembling. Every creak of the floor, every flash of lightning made her pulse hammer. A shout cut through the chaos. "Hide!" Luke's voice, fierce and raw, carried over the storm. Boots struck wood with force as he stormed into the cabin, rifle raised, eyes scanning. The children scrambled, small bodies pressed into corners, behind the stove, under the table. Fear and determination mingled in the air like sparks ready to ignite. Jonas Red stepped from the shadows, rifle raised, grin sharp with cruelty. His presence alone made the cabin feel smaller, the walls pressing in with menace. Luke fired first, but the shot went wide. The storm roared louder, masking the echo. Red fired back, the bullet grazing Luke's arm. Pain flared white-hot, burning through him, but he didn't falter. Clara froze for a heartbeat, watching Luke stumble. Rage, fear, and desperate courage surged through her all at once. Her fingers closed around the broken rocking chair leg, smooth now from repair, but still sturdy in her grasp. She stepped forward, heart hammering, feet crunching against scattered snow and broken furniture left from Red's earlier intrusion. Lightning flashed, illuminating her figure in stark white light. She swung. The leg connected with Red's head with a solid crack, the sound sharp and final. He staggered back, blinking, dazed, shock rippling across his face. Clara's chest heaved, the storm outside echoing the storm in her veins. "No one owns me now," she said, voice strong, unwavering, carrying across the chaos. The words weren't just for Red. They were for herself, for the children, for the years of fear and silence. Red lunged, furious and unsteady, but Luke's rifle barked again, this time sending him sprawling into the snow-strewn floor. Luke's arm burned, his body bruised, but he stood firm, eyes never leaving Clara. The children peeked from their hiding spots, small hands gripping each other, hearts racing. When the final strike landed, silence stretched for a breathless moment. Then Luke staggered, pain radiating through him, and collapsed beside the hearth. Blood streaked his sleeve, and the children's fear surged anew. Clara ran to him, hands shaking as she grasped his arm. "Luke, you're hurt!" Her voice cracked, but there was determination beneath the panic. The children, emboldened by her courage, rushed forward, eyes wide and desperate. Together, they lifted him to the rocking chair, its wood gleaming in the firelight, fully repaired, steady under his weight. The chair creaked but held, a symbol of resilience, of survival, of home. Clara sank beside him, pressing a hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath bruised ribs. Luke's breathing was ragged but alive, anchored by their shared defiance in the small, stubborn piece of wood that had come to mean safety and care. Outside, the storm matched the violence inside, wind lashing against the walls, rain and hail striking the roof with furious intensity. But inside, something had shifted. The cabin, battered but standing, felt alive with triumph and relief. Clara's eyes met Luke's, words unnecessary. The rocking chair was more than wood and nails. It was proof. Proof that they had endured, that fear could be met with courage, and that even a broken thing could be made whole again. The children circled, faces smeared with soot and snow, small hands patting Luke's shoulders, brushing flecks of ice from his coat. Clara allowed herself a shuddering breath, letting the adrenaline drain slowly, replaced by warmth and resolve. Lightning flashed once more, painting the cabin in stark light. Red groaned from the floor outside, his threat ended, his control shattered. Clara tightened her grip on the chair, feeling its weight, its stability, its promise. For the first time, the storm inside matched the storm outside. Fierce, unrelenting, but contained. They had survived, they had fought, and together they had begun to reclaim what had almost been lost. The rocking chair creaked again as Luke shifted, children leaning against him for support. Clara's lips curved into a small, exhausted smile. The battle was over, and for now they were home. The valley smelled of thawing earth. Snow melted into streams that traced silver veins across the fields, glinting in the late afternoon sun. Clara moved carefully through the wet soil, boots sinking slightly, hands raw from work. The ranch was alive again, not perfectly, not yet, but alive. The air carried the scent of pine, mud, and smoke, a blend she had come to recognize as home. Luke sat on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool coat, arm in a sling. The fire had warmed him that morning, though the stiffness in his shoulders and the ache in his ribs reminded everyone of the storm they had survived. He watched her from under the brim of his hat, quiet but alert, a soldier's vigilance softened by tenderness. Clara knelt near the small graves behind the barn. Her fingers traced the edges of carved markers, smoothed by snow and wind. Today she planted flowers, bright yellow blooms and deep blue perennials, her first act not of mourning but of living. She pressed the soil around each stem with care, thinking of the children, of Luke, of the fragile, fierce life that continued even after loss. The children darted across the yard, laughter ringing through the warming air, chasing the dog through puddles and mud. Their joy was uncontained, reckless, and contagious. Clara allowed herself a small smile, brushing dirt from her hands as she rose. The snow was gone, but the memory of the storms lingered, a reminder of what had been fought for and survived. That evening, the cabin glowed with firelight. Luke leaned back in the fully repaired rocking chair, polished and smooth, the curves catching the warm glow. The chair was steady beneath him, a silent witness to all they had endured, to courage and defiance, to survival and care. Clara moved beside him, settling onto the floor, legs tucked beneath her, hands folded loosely in her lap. For a long moment, They watched the flames dance, letting the warmth seep into them. The children's laughter carried faintly from the porch, a hymn of life in the valley. The rocking chair creaked gently as Luke shifted, and Clara felt a profound sense of peace. "I can't have children," she whispered, voice low, carrying a weight she had long hidden. Luke's lips curved into a slow, quiet smile. His eyes glinted in the firelight, soft but steady, full of warmth and understanding. "Good," he said, voice low, almost teasing, though tender. "I've got enough kids for both." Clara's breath caught. Relief, gratitude, and something new, something light flooded her chest. She let herself smile, truly smile, feeling the tension of months of fear and struggle unwind. The children's laughter rose again, blending with the crackle of the fire and the faint creak of the rocking chair. The chair shifted under Luke once more, moving gently with a rhythm all its own. Clara traced the grain with her fingers, polished wood smooth beneath her touch. It had been broken, splintered, repaired, and restored. Just like them. Just like the ranch. Just like the fragile, steadfast life they were building together. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, gentle now, carrying away the last echoes of storms past. The valley seemed to exhale, the fields shimmering with life, the ranch standing strong against the passage of time. Clara leaned back slightly, letting the firelight warm her face. Luke's hand brushed hers lightly, a quiet acknowledgement, no words necessary. The rocking chair rocked between them, holding their silence, steady, polished, whole. The children's laughter carried on into the night. The dog yipped and rolled in the warming grass. And in the cabin, safe and bright, Clara understood what it meant to survive and to begin living fully again. They had endured loss, defiance, and fear. But now they had found something steadier, trust, family, and a home rebuilt from the shards of past storms. The rocking chair swayed again, gently, holding them all.